Hello and welcome to another episode of Forgotten Cello Music. This is episode 83. In today's episode, I'll be looking at, and you will be hearing, something from Modern Suite, Opus 122 by Georg Goltermann. This is a set of 5 well-crafted little pieces, pretty much set for the intermediate student. I hope you'll stick around and listen and discover some more music that has been forgotten by the majority of us, but not for long, because I know you're going to want to look some of these pieces up, especially the Tarantella. Before I begin, I just want to take a moment to thank my members over on Patreon. I don't have many, but they are trusty, loyal members, and I appreciate you very, very much for that. Now, some of you have contributed here and there over the last couple of years, and I appreciate that just as much. Thank you so much. If you're interested in helping, which I hope you are, go to my Patreon. You don't have to be a member. You could support me by purchasing one of my arrangements, for example. Alternatively, you could also see my PayPal link that I'll have in the description and send me a tip for any amount that you like. I have a bit of a goal that I could reach at least 4 or 5 donations every month. And so if you're willing and you have the means, thank you so much. Visit either Patreon or my PayPal link. I'm also a private teacher of cello, and if you're interested in cello lessons with me, you can send me a message and we can see about getting something sorted out. This is episode 83 of my project, Forgotten Cello Music, on this podcast. Georg Goltermann wrote a lot of cello music for his students, and much of that music is set in the intermediate level. This modern suite, Opus 122, is right in the midst of that. This suite has 5 movements: a prelude, a romance, a funeral march, a gavotte, and a tarantella. This suite, let me just say something about that. I originally was going to do just the normal thing, which is, talk about each movement really. But then I thought, maybe I want to do something a little bit different, and this is what I'm going to talk about. It's a comparison. Then and now, I think that this is actually in perfect harmony with this entire project that I call Forgotten Cello Music. It is about the compositional form or style, which changes quite a lot between the recognized eras. For example, in the Baroque, there were suites of dances, which often included a prelude. To that, it is also notable that composers often wrote opuses in sets of 6. Take Bach's suites for solo cello. That's a prime example. You've got all 6 suites having a prelude and 5 dances. In the classical era, it would seem that there wasn't quite as much output in the suites, certainly not to match the symphonic works that were really kind of busting out of the seams. In the Romantic era, we saw much fewer sets of works per opus, which really began to dwindle quite a lot here. We got a lot of more individual pieces. In a nod perhaps to times past, we can see a greater number of suite-type compositions. Certainly you can find them for cello. However, they didn't include all the dance movements, and they weren't even dance movements a lot of the time. Although they did include some of the dances, usually there was at least a gavotte or a minuet in the suite, which were in most suites back in the Baroque era. Now, in this one, you've got other movements like romances, tarantellas, waltzes, etc., that are inserted in lieu of the other typical dances like the allemands and the courants and jigs and so on. Now, jumping up to the Impressionistic era, and also including the 20th century, we can see that there's quite a few less of these kind of compositions being created. The comparison I make is that the older eras were seemingly more concerned with creating groups of compositions, and certainly that had something to do with the fact that they were employed by patrons, rich dukes or the church, so they were expected to have a little bit more output per opus. But in these later periods, they seem to be a little more individualized. Certainly they were not working per se for any one patron, but more on commission, I guess you could say. And it seems like, especially in the 20th century, these works were a little more one-off, at least to the onlooker. I always find myself drawn again back to the Romantic era, and to the Baroque era too, more so than to the Classical and the 20th century era, although there's a lot of really nice and great music that comes out of both of those eras. For some reason, maybe it's just my genetic makeup, I don't know, I just seem like the Romantic era talks a lot to me. Probably I'm not all that special in that regard because, well, there's a lot of people playing the Romantic era music, of course. Well, whatever the reason, I hope there are some composers out there creating suites or works just as Goltermann did in the Romantic era, now here in our contemporary times. On to the individual pieces that comprise this modern suite by Goltermann. Beginning with, of course, number 1, the Prelude. From the outset, it seems to me that Goltermann wants to make clear that he's giving a nod to Bach and his 6 suites. Obviously, of course, the Prelude in particular. But he also seems to want to show us that it's distinct. It's a different era. It's him writing. And he's also intending his players not to be the professional. I would take that away from after reading and recording these pieces. It seems to be kind of a meandering, walking about of notes, and he does give us some nice cadence points to the ends of each phrase. And it's probably very doable for most of the intermediate cellists out there. But you do have to take some time to work on the tricky passages because he throws in some unexpected string crossings, a few awkward jumps, and then slur patterns are interrupted. They just straight up deviate from what pattern came before. Overall, the Prelude is good, but it is probably my least favorite out of the set of 5. The Romance, number 2. As is expected from such a title, this is a charming number with a nice little lilt to it. The middle section changes in character and rhythm. This is very normal for any piece that is like an A-B-A. It becomes a little bit more turbulent, I guess quite like a romance in real life for most of us. I don't know, turbulent might be a little bit strong in language, but I don't think too strong, not too far off anyway. However, when you are practicing it and you're attempting to fit all the notes in, especially with the long slur, mostly 6 notes per slur, it can feel, or I should say, you can feel the agitation right away. Aside from the few shifts in the A section, I think it's quite playable. The B section will likely need a little more attention, and you'll need to practice those fast fingers and coordinated string crossings. Overall, I think the Romance is a very good movement, and it is one that I like very much. Number 3, the Funeral March. Now, when I first saw the Funeral March, I guess looking back, I would have to say I was a little surprised that he would put a funeral march in this modern suite. Who knows, maybe it was the times he was living in. I believe his dates are 1824 to 1898, if I recall correctly. So there could have been some battle or war when he wrote this. I don't know the year he wrote this, and there's very, very little biographical information about Georg Goltermann. It is kind of an unusual piece, and although it is unexpected, and for that reason, it would be extremely fascinating to find long-lost documentation that explains in firsthand what Goltermann was thinking and his whole purpose, what caused him to write a funeral march in the middle of this suite. And indeed, just something about all of his music. But again, I don't know where to find any of that information. The character of this number, especially as a funeral march, it really does test one's poise and resolve to retain the integrity of the pulse. One might think of Beethoven or Chopin. They have some pretty famous funeral marches. This piece is marked sostenuto at the beginning. That's the only marking you get. This doesn't necessarily equate to slow. However, it is certainly not a fast piece, for obvious reasons. I think one can imagine that it should be played with a great deal of respect, however, for whatever or whoever this march may have been written for. Number 4, Gavotte. Ah, yes, Gavotte. The cello, lots of Gavottes have been written as individual numbers. Popper is a good example. He wrote several Gavottes, and there's one that's very famous, I believe it's in D major, that nearly all students learn. Now, it is said that a Gavotte is a dance where one picks up their feet, up off the ground, in the dance. In many instrumental instances, that concept can certainly be interpreted merely as sort of a hop. You can kind of feel it in a lot of the music that at least the ones that I've played. And this is how I play most Gavottes. I have this imagination of people kind of hopping around when they're playing. And of course, you can always go to YouTube and find somebody that has videoed each of these old dances and see how it might well have been danced in the day. As is the tradition, the Gavotte begins on the third quarter note, or the second beat, since they are most often marked in cut time. And it does seem to me that the music really does wish the dancers to lift their feet from the very beginning. I don't know, can you hear it? Overall, there's nothing really difficult about the notes, I would say, except possibly how rapid they go especially in the middle section where there's a sequence of very fast slurred notes that go down. So you'll want to look at that. Overall, I like this Gavotte very much, and I kind of like playing Gavottes in general. Go look it up. I think you would find it to be quite amusing. Finally, number 5, the last movement, the Tarantella. Ah, yes, the Tarantella. What's the first thing that comes to mind for most of you? Come on, be honest. For me, it's tarantula. I mean, it looks nearly identical, doesn't it? Okay, not identical, but very, very close. One can't help but make the connection. Well, I did a little searching in the Old Groves Dictionary. Before I tell you about that, though, this lively dance is in 6/8 meter and very often takes the form of ABA coda. The A sections are in the minor mode while the B section is in the major. Thus, we have this alternating minor to major to minor modes. And you can clearly hear it in any of the tarantellas that are written for cello. It seems, after I read that Old Groves article, it seems that there is a little bit of truth that this tarantella was associated with the tarantula spider. It is a little unclear whether the names are really connected or not. However, it is certainly more clear that this is an Italian dance originating from Taranto in the south of Italy. That's Taranto, not Toronto, as in, anyway, Taranto. That's how they spell it. As I was saying, the tarantula, oh, whoops, there was that slip. I do it automatically. The tarantella does feature prominently in the cello repertoire. And the one that a lot of students learn first, what is it called? Who's it by? W.H. Squire. Any cellist probably knows that one. And if you do like tarantellas as much as I do, and I will shamelessly say I think tarantellas are great, and it's just a lot of fun to play, you should definitely look this piece up. If you don't like any of the others, I venture to guess you would kind of like this one. Now, Popper also wrote a tarantella, which is a good deal more challenging than either the Squire or Goltermann tarantellas, but it is well worth the effort. Overall, as with a lot of Goltermann's music, it's worth looking at. It's worth learning at least a few of the movements. For most of you, I would say you should incorporate at least 1 or 2 movements into your practice, just so you can be acquainted with what they were doing, how they were writing, and the styles, what they were giving their own students, and what was expected of them. I think that's kind of interesting. And it's very informative as to the history of things. Well, remember, you can support me by listening to this podcast episode all the way through, going back and listening to older episodes all the way through. You can go to my YouTube channel, press like and subscribe, and of course watch the videos all the way through, and watch as many as you can. That'd be great. I'm almost to 500 subscribers as of now. This is March 19, 2024. So once I get that threshold of 500, I can finally reach that goal that I've been wanting for now 2 years. Other ways to support me, of course, are by donations to my PayPal and becoming a member on Patreon. But if you don't want to just give your money away for nothing other than some nice videos and some informative, tutorial videos for learning cello on YouTube, you can buy some or arrangements that I've made They're available at my Patreon, as well as some other downloads in my shop there. So thanks very much for listening, and tell your friends, tell your family members, tell other musicians about this. I think that they might find it quite interesting. As far as I know, I am quite a unique podcast here that deals with one very specific thing in cello music, and that is music that has been forgotten. Thanks again for listening, and remember to play more forgotten cello music.